Welcome back to another episode of the Dog Pound. Today's guest is definitely the biggest, the highest up exec we have ever had on the show today, and I'm so incredibly excited to share his stories with you guys. Our guest is the president of the Sharks Sport and Entertainment Company, Jonathan Becher. Today we unpacked so many different topics, but before we get into that, I just want to extend my gratitude and thanks for this opportunity. So Jonathan, thank you so much for making this dream of mine here come true and for sharing your words and your stories and experiences with us today. In terms of what we get to cover today, we go over Jonathan's early career, which includes starting up a few different companies which become publicly traded. We then learn a little bit about what got him into the world of SAP and analytics specifically, and why he pursued that passion, and then how that led to his current position with Sharks Sport and Entertainment. I really hope you take away, but with that being said, let's dive in, let's go meet Jonathan, and go Sharks. This is one of the biggest episodes we are going to have here today on the Dog Pound podcast. Joined today by Jonathan Becher. Jonathan, thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate it. And before we get into things, looking forward to the 2025-26 season, and just want to wish you guys best of luck. You guys are going to kill it.
Appreciate that, Nick. Happy to join you today, and thank goodness it's already October because I've been missing some hockey.
Yeah, I think we all have been, and only downfall with October means fall and cold winters here in Canada. But I am really looking forward towards the season. I think this year is going to be great, and hopefully some teams can make some good runs this year. But with that being said, let's kind of jump into some things. I think how I've organized it today is we are going to have a lot of personal conversation, as well as dive in a little bit into the business as well. But I always love starting with the personal to get to know you, and so for our listeners to get to know you a little bit as well. But first, I just kind of want to go over all your experiences. You have quite the diversified resume, and quite the unique one getting into your role as president of the San Jose Sharks. So if you don't mind just kind of highlighting some of your experiences along the route.
Yeah, so you're right. I have an unusual career. I think some people call it a jagged resume because it's hard to figure out how you get from one to another. I usually tell people I've had three what feel like entirely different careers, but unexpectedly, each one has built on the other. So I'll do a high level. We can come back and go into more details if you want. So I started as a software developer. Then I became a business person. And now, as you say, I'm a sports exec. If I look back at my software developer, it was mostly at early stage companies, at startups. My own focus was infrastructure and analytics. I've always had a head for analytics. Math we'll get to maybe is a part of what's drilled into me. And so I used my degrees. I have an undergraduate and a graduate degree in computer software and computer engineering. But I think looking back, what I didn't understand at the time is I was really coached to not be an inside out guy, which means sit in your cube, program. These days we'd call it vibe program by yourself, but rather be an outside in person. I spent a ton of time with customers understanding what they wanted, which influenced my programming, and getting close to customer changed the trajectory of my life. There's a story, if we have time, that I'll tell about a shoe. And I might say I'm sitting in the chair I am now because of a shoe. We can get to that if you want. So then as I got closer to customers, I realized that customers technically had more power and more influence than the engineers did, even though I was an engineer. And so then I got to my second arc, which was business degree. And I was a 3-time software company CEO. One of them became publicly traded. I ended up being the chief marketing officer for the gigantic company SAP, more than 100,000 employees, 3 times bigger than the town I grew up in, which is another story as well. And I specialized in what's called digital transformation, taking people from analog and paper and pen and traditional things and trying to digitize it. And if I look at that career, probably the big differentiator I had was the intersection of user experience, which relied on my software background. How do you design software and systems to make them easier to understand? And customer experience, taking that outside in approach to figure out what they really want versus what you think they want. And putting those together, UX and CX, really kind of drove me from 3 different jobs. And now, as you point out, I'm the head of a sports and entertainment organization. by the way, one of the things we may talk about is it's not just hockey. We
Mm.
actually have multiple sports teams, et cetera. And partially because of my earlier experience, we have what I call a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And our BHAG is we want to pioneer the future of sports entertainment. We don't know what the future is just yet, but we want to look forward as much as we can. So there's the very fast overview, Nick.
Wow, that is, as you're saying, a crazy story. And I love kind of that you've had your hand in many different areas of the industry, and you really tailored yourself towards your skills and your passions of being in the analytics world. And I think that's a lot of what a lot of people like to leverage and really focus on. You did mention a shoe story. Now, this is one that I definitely haven't heard yet. So if you don't mind going over it, getting a little bit more personal, it sounds like a great one.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. There are a bunch of incidents in my career where they were much more transformative for me than I realized at the time. And as I've gotten older, I've mellowed a bit, but I was a bit excitable, et cetera. So the shoe story basically boils like this. I was 25, 26, young programmer in a big conference room with a bunch of senior programmers and the chief technology officer there as well. And we were discussing features from the backlog list that should be in the next version of the product. And there was this incredibly long list of things that we thought we should deliver in the next product. And we were arguing, everyone had their opinion. I'm the young guy at the table, so I didn't really say very much because I was a little bit in awe of this process. And at some point, the CTO took off his shoe and started banging on the table and said, "We are going to build this." And he spewed what it was because that's what the customers want. He may have used some expletives as well, but this is a PG podcast, so I won't actually do that as well. And everyone starts shaking their head and going, yeah, 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 that's what we should do. And remember, I'm 25, 26, and I'm looking around this room. There are probably 14, 15, I don't know, people in the room. And I realized in this flash that not a single one of us had ever met a customer. They were all saying, this is what we should do. And yet, because the customers want to do it, but we didn't know what the customer was. So I got up and left the room, staggered. The CTO was staring daggers at me, wandered through the office. This is a relatively small company, 150 people, until I found the Western Regional Head of Sales, a guy that I still talk to this day. We're actually American football buddies, as it turns out. And I walked him in his office and I explained what we just talked about. And I said, "Do you think we should do A or B?" And he's like, "I don't know. Let's go ask a customer." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Let's just go ask a customer." So we go out in the parking lot. We get in his 7 Series BMW, and here I'm driving a beat up Toyota Tercel. So I was like, salespeople have more money than I do. This is interesting. We drive, I don't know, like 10 or 15 minutes, and we go see one of our customers. We walk in almost without an audience, and we sit down, and this is the chief, I don't remember, information officer or something of a relatively well-known company. And Ed, now my buddy, then the VP of sales, says, "Jonathan, ask him your question." So I replay this conversation with the shoe pounding, and the customer says, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I wouldn't buy A or B. I don't know what you guys are." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, I wouldn't buy either of those things." I go, "Well, what do you want?" And then we spent the next hour just going back and forth of his problems, etc. So the end of this long and somewhat boring story is I come back and I tell the CTO, which is my boss's boss's boss, I think at some point. Remember, I'm low person on the totem pole. "Hey, I met a customer," who they didn't believe me. "They don't want any of the things we're talking about. They should do this." And he's like, "I don't believe you." And I'm like, "Yeah, here it is. I got all my notes, etc." And they ignored me, which is not the fun part of the story. The sales rep, my friend now, hired me, and I became the first customer engineer. And I went around the country collecting information about what customers want, and that actually ended up being how I got into product marketing long term. And that got me the business degree. So there you go.
Oh, that's an awesome
Just
story.
a guy's banging on the table talking about customers, and I realized we didn't know what that meant. So there you go, Nick.
No, I mean, hey, at least you guys, I guess, figured it out. And I think a lot more sport and entertainment companies are really following kind of in that lead. Maybe not with the exact same shoe story, but I have noticed over the time and throughout my degree, which is near complete, that everyone's coming together to focus more so on the consumer, what the fans want, right? What can make them unique and what can be tailored towards their needs. Because that's sport and entertainment, right? And its core, right? You deliver what you can on the ice, what you can as an entertainment value, but what else can you do beyond that? So I love that personal story, and I love, being a young individual and yourself in that position. You went and actually did something about it. I think there's a lot of individuals that may sit back and just kind of think, oh, I can't do much about this because I'm the young guy, right? But no, you went and did something with it, and I absolutely loved it. I think we'll kind of dive in a little bit too into some of kind of your personal ventures. You mentioned your startups, which became publicly traded as well. So like you're in Acru software and Pilot software. And I think those are some key moments, just kind of starting those things up on your own. I think a lot of young students are really scared to start. I think starting anything of any magnitude of any industry is really difficult. Even for me, starting this podcast was nerve-wracking because it's like, what are people going to think about what I'm going to do? But I just kind of wanted to go over, how did that prepare you kind of for your larger role with SAP, and then now with the Shark Sport and Entertainment? And would you just suggest that people should look into creating startups or starting something on their own rather than joining just a large organization fresh out of graduation?
So look, I'm a big and guy. If we end up talking about culture, I don't believe in false dichotomies of this versus this or this or that. I'm an and so if you're lucky enough in your career to work for a startup or create one yourself, and you should also work for both a big company, it's a false dichotomy. In my mind, startups are hard. I mean, they're maybe 100 times harder than big companies, because you got to do a little bit of everything. There's no safety net, but they also give you opportunities to do things that you weren't trained to do. You didn't learn in college. You can grow as a person much more quickly in a small company, particularly in a startup, than you can in a very large company. I don't know. Here, I guess another story for you. So my second startup was a company called Nia Vista. That doesn't matter. We had landed Walmart as our first big customer, and this is 2000s, very early in my career. And I actually had to move down to Bentonville, Arkansas, and we were doing really well. We were making a lot, but only after one customer. And we couldn't sell to any other customer because they didn't like themselves as Walmart. And so I'm a little more senior than I was in the shoe banging story, but still not very senior at all. And the board calls a meeting, invites all the senior executives in to try to figure out what to do, because the internet had just become a thing. You're too young to remember this, Nick, but the big companies back then were pets.com and Webvan, neither of which actually exist. And after about, I don't know, 3-hour board meeting, the lead investor drugged me into the board meeting and asked me a question. And the right answer would have been to support the CEO and say, yes, we can steal this, etc. But I was really intrigued by an upstart company that I just heard about called Amazon. And I'd done a little online research. And again, it's funny to say now in 2025 that Amazon was unknown in the year 2000, but it wasn't. It was just books at the time. And I said, yeah, we ought to go shift from Walmart to Amazon, even though Amazon would have to grow like 10,000 times bigger, which it eventually did, of course, to make this in any sense. And he said, well, do you think it will? And I said, well, what if it does? And they dismissed the board meeting. I went to the bathroom. I came back and I got promoted to the CEO on the back of that story. And we shifted the entire company. They laid off half the brick and mortars team to become an internet-based company. And I remember asking the lead investors, I said, what the heck are you doing? I don't know, 30 years old, 31 years old. I don't remember exactly. You're giving me the keys to the kingdom. I don't know what you're doing. And they were like, we believe in you more than you believe in yourself.
Wow.
And that stuck with me a lot. I try to believe in people that work for me, sometimes more than they believe in themselves, because others have done that for me. That's a long-winded way of saying is if you have a chance in your career, I'd encourage you to go small, then big, then back to small.
I love it. I love the answer. And so the reason why I was asking is I've been part of a small sport organization in a small basketball league here in Canada called the CEBL. And learning that firsthand was small. And now I'm an intern for Wasserman, which is a massive, massive marketing agency. Yeah. So that transitioned me just seeing, obviously two different roles, but just the different capacities and what I'm able to translate because I had so much responsibility at the smaller team or organization, and then bring
Yeah.
that to the larger caliber one, and not only learn what they do to be successful, and then if I were to ever transition back to that smaller kind of organization, or in your case, as you did with a startup or whatnot, it's amazing as to what you can learn. But I love your kind of answer about just having the and it kind of questions instead of don't do this or that. I love how you mentioned it's a dichotomy, and I want to get in a little bit into the culture of things because I think that's so important. That drives me in what I do, and that's something I always love preaching on this podcast is the emphasis on having a very strong culture. Now, for you, you do your manage by walking around posts, which I have to say I absolutely love. And there's
Thank
a
you, Nick.
there's a few different topics, and I really implore anyone and encourage anyone who's listening to this today to please take a look at it because I've learned so much from your posts. But you did mention, and we're going to go into the digital kind of age and revolution right now, as just kind of being a bottom up instead of a planned kind of revolution. And just along with kind of setting that appropriate culture. Now, for you, what would you suggest is the best way for young individuals from their position to set a proper culture in an organization if they're provided the opportunity?
Yeah. So two quick things. One is don't wait for the opportunity. That
Bang.
you not all bosses are good bosses. Sorry, that's just the reality of things. And when you're early in career, you're not actually often given opportunities. So sometimes you have to take an opportunity. So look, I have a couple of mantras that I live my life by. One of them is culture eats strategy. It's funny because I ran a strategy company for a while. So you think I'd care like so much about it. But at the end of the day, it matters more how you do things than it is what you do. And it matters more how you make people feel than how you reward them. It's culture is sort of everything. But the reality is it's really hard to dictate culture top down. I guess I've been the CEO 4 times, 3 at tech companies and 1 at sports and entertainment. And, I think if you're early in your career, you have this idea, I certainly did, I'm guessing everybody does, that the CEO is all knowing, they can control everything, what they say is, an edict, et cetera. In reality, that's not really what happens. You give general guidance. There's certain things you can obviously control, but you can't force culture on people. Culture is what they want. I guess if you don't mind, Nick, I'll give you a quick story here as well. When I got acquired into SAP, for those who don't know SAP, it's a big Germanic tech company. I loved my 10 years there. I didn't think I was going to stay that long, but I had a fantastic time. But early in, I was medium senior before I became a C-level exec there. I tried to help the company with digital transformation, and I'm a Silicon Valley guy. I live here in the epicenter of tech and digital innovation, and at the time, SAP hadn't done a ton of digital innovations, and so a few people, including the CEO, said, help us figure out how to do that. The Silicon Valley mantra back then was fail fast, and so I spent all this time trying to teach people about failure. I guess the simplest thing you can say is I failed to convince people that they should fail more often because deep in the Germanic culture is product excellence. If you think about German cars or German manufacturing, it's always about, getting every weld perfect, et cetera. And here's this brash young American coming in and saying, no, I don't want you to be perfect. I want you to fail. And so that just didn't work. And so culturally, what I realized is I still want people to change, but I've got to do it the way they want to do it, which is the scientific method. So if you're very scientific oriented, you know about degrees of freedom and making small changes and experimentation. And so I switched my style from fail more, fail often, fail fast, which is a very Silicon Valley, to let's run a whole bunch of experiments rather than doing 1 or 2 big things. Let's do hundreds of small things. And so I think, and that, with a bunch of other people's help, not just me, that worked really well. And I think the advice I'd give anybody, no matter how early your career may be, is culture can be set by anyone. There's an old quote, which I think people give to Gandhi, but I don't think Gandhi actually ever said it, which is be the change you want to see. And so if there's a certain culture, start acting that way. If there's things you shouldn't do, don't do them. You can set culture, and you don't have to have title or authority to help set culture. You just have to be willing to walk the walk.
Wow. That is one of the best answers to any culture question I've asked on this podcast. That to me is, and as you mentioned, the opportunity may not come to you. That's what you mentioned at the start. And I think it's great for you to mention that, because a lot of people, a lot of interns will wait to get work, wait to, hear back from something. It's like, go out, take initiative and see what happens. And I think also too, what you mentioned the word failure a lot. Now, a lot of people, some people discuss, they don't like the word failure because it's a learning lesson, and that's totally understandable, and I totally understand your opinion as well. But the idea of actually like forcing it upon you is failing is good. Like, go on and do it. That's what you guys wanted to happen. It's just great story, and the relation as well to the German excellence, right? Of really performing for that perfection.
If you're a hockey goalie, are you going to score every time you take a shot? No, you've got to learn what works. If you're the goalie, you're going to stop every shot. No, you're going to have to get better. The only way to improve yourself in sport, in life, in anything, is to push the boundaries to the point where you can't do what it is you're supposed to do. And yes, calling it failure causes us all to squirm a bit, but it's just pushing yourself and trying to learn more out of it and figure out what your boundaries are.
I love it. And I think that totally translates to just that kind of consumer relation business as well a little bit. And this is kind of where I'm guiding with the next question is, I think when we look at the sport and entertainment world, even just in sport, you have that healthy balance of kind of traditionalism and what has worked. And as you're mentioning, a lot can fail. You went to go speak to some customers asking, hey, do you like A or B? What do you need? And they said, oh, this is terrible. We don't want either of those kind of things.
Yeah.
I just kind of want to learn about, how do you actually balance what people have already liked, what already works, just traditionally speaking, but also pushing for change to enhance a fan's experience and just guest experience overall in the sport and entertainment world.
So specifically to sport and entertainment, not overall. Yes?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll give you my advice. And this is one of those cases where what works for us may or may not work for other sport and entertainment organization. So I'm very much of an 80-20 person. 80% experiment for the future, 20% look backwards. Another way we tend to say it is, yes, you need to honor tradition. Of course you do. But you need to be ready for the future. And the analogy, by the way, that is a very Silicon Valley mindset kind of way to do it. That was not the way it was when I showed up here 7.5 years ago. So I'm not pretending that that's standard in sports and entertainment. And when we first started talking about this as an extended group here, one of the things I gave was the analogy of driving a car. So if you're driving a car, do you look backwards? Yes, you do look in the rearview mirror, but hopefully you only do it like 10 or 20% of the time, because where you're going is in the future as well. And you should probably do that in the sports world as well. There are too many teams, we've been guilty at times, that spend all their time talking about the all-time record that happened 10 years ago, or the time they won the trophy 20 years ago, or an all-time. Those are great. Honor tradition. But that should be 10 to 20% of your focus. Mm-hmm. And what you should be doing is preparing for what's next. As you pointed out, that's the experimental mindset. I have no idea what sports and entertainment will look like in 20 years, right? So when I say pioneer of the future, for those of you who know the American lore, right? When they went to go find California, they didn't actually know where California was. There were no maps, right? There certainly was no Google Maps there. There was not even any handwritten maps. They just sort of headed out west. In fact, it was go west, young man. And actually, not everybody made it because they made mistakes. And they actually ended up in Oregon originally, not in California. And so there are lots of mistakes made, but it was always the incremental do things. And again, stories, because I like telling stories. I'm in the midst of one of these right now. We announced a couple of days ago that we're going to change the goal song. The goal song that we've used for 11 years. And people are freaking out. People, I mean fans. They're like, how can you? Some love the fact because they didn't like the existing. Some hate it. Some people think they know what the new goal song is. Some people don't. Change is just hard for people. And my answer is, first of all, cool your jets. You haven't actually heard it yet. You think you may have heard it, but wait till it. And if it turns out our fans don't love the goal song, big deal. We'll go change it again. This is not stuff that is written in stone. And I think sometimes we take ourselves a little bit too seriously in sports and entertainment. This is about fun. And you can have a bit of fun with it and experiment. And when things go wrong, they go wrong and you try something else.
I love it. I love it. And it's always pushing for change. And I think, if you get too far back in that rearview mirror, as you're mentioning in your analogy, it's hard to catch up. I'm a big Suits watcher, and I'm not sure if you've ever watched Suits. It's a lawyer show, and
I have,
and
of
and
course.
and Harvey Specter once said, if you get behind the eight ball, you'll never catch up. And same kind of sort of concept, right? And I think that's really
Wait,
important. Go ahead,
Nick,
sorry.
I'm gonna flip the script on you. Which character do you most identify in Suits?
Most identify personally, like towards me.
Yeah.
Oh boy, honestly, I wish I had the mind of Mike Ross. And I definitely do not have that kind of pizzazz that Harvey does.
Okay.
But I honestly, I do like a little bit of a Lewis Litt. He's a bit of a fighter, and he's just nitty and gritty and is kind of willing to do anything. And I just like his persona of feeling that he's kind of overshadowed all the time and look by kind of like an underdog in a way. I don't want to spoil the show for anyone, but when he does force himself to become a named partner, I didn't like that part. But other than that, yeah. But I'll flip it right back to you. Who do you think you resemble?
My answer would normally be in a world of everyone wanting to be Harvey, don't forget that Donna really runs the show.
I like it. Yep, this is true. He did say that he can't be himself without Donna. So
Yep.
it is true, and I think
The world needs more Donnas. Not everyone can be Harvey. So
yeah, well, I don't think we need more Harveys in this world. That's for sure.
exactly
Because
right.
yeah, yeah, a little. He's a bit egocentrical, but but that's what makes him unique. But yes, Donna is. I think that's important to kind of think about too. Is that kind of support system that people will have around you too, right?
Yeah.
There's not maybe just one Donna in your life, but you have multiple little mini Donnas that really push you and help you to move forward. But in terms of moving forward, I kind of want to get a little bit more personal here. You're talking about looking in the rear view and looking forward. And I think there's a lot of people that are able to get into the sport industry, but I think there's also that separation of what makes you last and what makes you remembered in the sports industry. So if you're to kind of think about your career or, the upbringing of some young individuals looking to really make an impact on the sport and entertainment industry, what do you think separates an individual from just getting into the industry versus lasting and being memorable?
So look, the sports industry is unusual in that most of the companies are relatively small.
Mm,
And since they're relatively small, it doesn't feel like there's much chances to get promoted very often. And most of us view promotion as the definition of being successful, right? All of us, from when we were young, we think, oh, how do I become a manager? And then how I become a director? And then I become a VP? And then see whatever your title being as well. Um, and if you are the kind of person that measures success by the number of direct reports, it's the funnel, I guess, for lack of a better word, is small, so it's hard to do that. On the other hand, there are so many opportunities that you can't get in a bigger company. You may have entered the sports world on the sales side. That's probably the single most popular way to get in.
mhm.
Or maybe you came in like me on the analytics side because I did a bunch of analytics for sports companies, which is how I did that as well. What I would say is, regardless of what your role is now, do what I did early in my career. Volunteer for something that's not in your scope. There is always groups that are outside yours that are looking for. Now, of course, don't do so much that you can't get your own job done, but we all can probably find a way to carve out a couple extra hours a week. Because I would say the single most important thing you can get, particularly if you're still early in your career, is versatility. What you want to do is not be known as someone who can only do X, whatever X is. You want somebody who is deep on X, but also has Y. That's going back to what I said a little bit a while ago, which is you want to be an and person.
Mhm.
Um, if you want to be hyper technical about it, I think there was some analysis years ago that called it a T-shaped person. Someone who's, if you think of the letter T, it's deep in one thing, but then broad in a whole bunch of stuff as well. This is like the debate between being a generalist or being a specialist. There's no debate. You need to be both. And early in your career, you're going to be a specialist. You're going to be, because you came with a degree and you focused on one thing. But the sooner you can start becoming a little more generous and getting exposure to more things, the better off you are. And maybe, you can spawn up another spike, so you don't look like a T, you look like a pie. And then eventually you have three spikes. I don't know. That is your three-legged. So I'm running out of visual metaphors here more than anything else. But if I were to pick one word to hang your hat on to get advanced is don't be so obsessed just about title. Be obsessed
Mhm.
about versatility and learning new skills.
God, I love that. I love that. I think, just having as your resume as so you just have broad experience in absolutely everything. And I can't even use the word broad. That's totally incorrect. But just get out there and volunteer. And I think also a perk to that is you never know who you'll meet as well. As you
Fair.
mentioned, we do definitely always think about the promotion and getting certain jobs and what that may look like on a resume. But I think, the networking is something that can be overlooked. But also a lot of people, at least I find in kind of my age, will network improperly. Always are looking for the job or always looking for that next step. But it's not about that. It's actually about the personal connections. And that's kind of one of the last things I want to dive in with you today about is just kind of going through that and use your LinkedIn profile and platform a lot on top of your managed by walking around, right? And that's brings a lot to your personal brand and who you are as an individual. I could tell by just reading through those posts, you are someone who's out there and as we talked about before this podcast, having informal and have fun, have a good conversation. I just kind of want to talk about how important would you say it to establish a strong personal brand and do it for the right reasons, not necessarily, oh, hey, by the way, I'm reaching out because I want to chat with you just for the intention of getting a job, but instead of getting to know you.
So happy to do that, Nick. Maybe a comment on something else you said, which is I think you're right. People tend to network. I don't want to say incorrectly. That's so harsh, but not optimally, especially when you're
Mm,
young in your career. At least I did, and I observe a lot of people because, and I'm going to be a little oversimplistic here, is the first thing you want to do is take from the network.
right.
And I think you got to start by establishing a network. And establishing a network is not asking for anything or assuming anything. It's just creating those connections in a very authentic way. And then I promise I'll answer your question. And then I would encourage you to try to give to your network before you take from your network. So
Mm,
it's like a three phase. It's create, give, and then finally you can take, which is to get the job or anything else as well. So
love it.
I'm with you there as well as networking is hard. And like anything else, you're going to fail. Sorry, we don't like to say. So experiment a bunch of times and then you'll get better. So back to your question about personal brand. Look, we all have a personal brand, whether we think about it or not.
Hmm.
Personal brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And that's one of the interview questions I sometimes ask people because everyone has their weird interview questions, which is, what would 3 words would your friends or colleagues describe you? Not how would you just, and how do they differ from how you would describe yourself? And trying and see if people are self-cognizant enough of, I want to be X, but people view me as Y. There's
Hmm.
some interesting conversations you can have there.
Hmm.
But the one thing that I caution people is people try to create a a personal brand, which isn't authentic to them. You know, you said part of my brand is writing, right? I write a lot. You see me on LinkedIn and my own personal blog. I write in a bunch of other places, which you don't see yet because they aren't the waters that you fish in, which is perfectly fine because I'm not actually writing for you, Nick. No offense. Love that you enjoy my writing.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm writing because I enjoy writing and it's
Love it.
natural for me. In fact, if you were to go back and find the 16-year-old Jonathan, he thought he might become a writer one day. And so this is something that I'm amplifying. And when I started doing it more regularly, I did it as much for corporate visibility for the little bitty company that I worked for. And it was my way of differentiating myself. Remember, I said versatility,
Hmm.
and then it became part of the personal brand as well. And so, if you want to build your own personal brand, amplify what's authentic to you. Think about what makes you different from other people. Don't try to become someone you're not really. I mean, you can get a little bit better skills you're not better at. That's personal growth, of course. But your brand ought to be anchored in, frankly, what gives you joy. It almost doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be directly related to your job. And you could be the TikTok video person. Just be careful what you put out there on the social
Yeah.
platforms. But I there was when I became CMO of SAP, I got voted the most social CMO by, I don't remember anyway, some magazine. And I remember thinking, what the heck? How could I possibly be? I don't have time for a bunch of social stuff. And then I realized so many people thought they knew me because of the connections that I'd made and all the writing I'd done and that I was like, okay, I hadn't tried to do that, but that was part of what people thought of me as opposed to what I thought of myself.
Wow. Well, It's a great story, and it's funny to think that that was your reaction to it. But I love just kind of that authenticity part, and I think a lot of people. One person I had on the podcast last season said, you can't do what you want for money or anything else. You do it for what you love and what you want to do, and that will get you a
Yeah.
long way. And I think that really connects well to your kind of point about personal branding. But with that being said, there's been so much great advice throughout this podcast. But to wrap it up, I always love to ask for a big piece that you think can really inspire and push individuals to kind of break into the industry. So, if you had one big piece of advice to share with young individuals looking to get into the sport and entertainment world, what would that piece be?
Uh, be careful with trying to plan your future.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, was it Mike Tyson or maybe Muhammad Ali? One of those guys that says everyone has a perfect plan until they get punched in the face.
Mm.
And while I don't want any of you to get punched in the face, the reality is life never quite unfolds the way that you expect it to do. There are bumps and there are big potholes. There are unexpected left turns as well. And so, I mentioned versatility. Maybe a better word is adaptability.
Mm.
I've long wanted to know whether, we talk a lot about IQ, which is book smarts, and maybe a little bit we talk about EQ, the emotional quotient as well. To me, there's something like AQ. There's this adaptability quotient. Be adaptable. When the door opens, walk through it. Or if it's only slightly ajar, push it open. I think the best advice is yes, it's all a little scary. Yes, it's going to be chaotic, etc. But mostly the stuff works out.
Mm-hmm.
Be willing to put yourself out there and take more risks than you think you're ready for. And yeah, you know, you'll get punched in the nose occasionally, but maybe somebody will even bite your ear off. Sorry, now we're just in boxing metaphors or something like that. But it tends to work out.
I love it. I love that answer. I think that was one of the most unique ones we've had. And I always say to myself, you got to roll with the punches, right? Or it's just the way a cookie crumbles sometimes when it comes to things not going according to plan. And I think that's just the nature of our industry. And even in a lot of industries, a lot of things never go according to plan. But
Yeah.
with that, Jonathan, I think we'll wrap this one up. This has been an unreal episode of podcast. Thank you so much for your time today and for this opportunity. And best of luck with the upcoming season. It's going to be great.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate that.
Of
Had a
course.
lot of fun.
Thank you. Me as well.